How would you like to live? In a mansion with all the luxuries of the 18th century at your disposal, delicious food, fine fabrics, beautiful gardens, and you can invite your friends over for dinner parties and they can bring their friends and their friends can bring their friends. All of the food and drink you can consume will be free. What could be better? It sounds great until you realize that this isn't a dream 18th century home. It's the typical coffee house of that era. Welcome to my channel. Today we are exploring why life in a coffee house was so chaotic. There were two main reasons why people went to coffee houses. The first was to get a cheap meal. Coffee houses were extremely popular in the 18th century because they provided a cheap way to get food. In an age when eating out was an expensive luxury, coffee houses offered a more affordable alternative. For a small fee, customers could enjoy a hot meal and an even hotter cup of coffee. This made them a popular spot for working men who needed to save their money for other expenses. The second reason was to discuss politics. Coffee houses quickly became known as political hubs where people could come to discuss the latest news and events. Because coffee was a neutral drink, it wasn't associated with either political party, which made it an ideal place for people from all sides to meet and talk. Some coffee houses even had special rooms set aside for political discussions. So if you wanted to stay up to date on all the latest gossip, the place to be was in the coffee house. This led to overcrowding. As coffee houses grew in popularity, they started to attract larger crowds, which created a number of problems. For example, it was nearly impossible to find a seat during busy hours, and because there was so much chatter going on, it was difficult to have a private conversation. But perhaps the most unsanitary aspect of the coffee house was the shared plates of food. Since customers were charged by the plates rather than by the serving, it was common for people to pile their plates high with food and then leave without finishing it all. The result was a sticky, messy situation that was not very appetizing. Another major problem with overcrowding was the lack of ventilation. Coffee houses were usually dark and stuffy, which made it unpleasant for customers. Additionally, because there were so many people in close proximity to each other, it was easy for rumors and gossip to spread like wildfire. This created an atmosphere of suspicion and intrigue which was not conducive to a relaxing environment. Moreover, because of the overcrowding, it was almost impossible for staff to keep the establishment clean. The result was a coffee house that was often filthy and smelled strongly of stale waste. Then there was the issue of the patrons. Coffee houses attracted a wide variety of people from all walks of life. This created a melting pot of cultures and ideas, but it also led to conflict. For example, it was common for street vendors and beggars to enter coffee houses and solicit for money. This was obviously annoying to customers, but it was also dangerous since it gave thieves an opportunity to mingle with the crowd and pilfer valuables. In addition, because coffee houses were such a popular place to discuss politics, they often attracted the attention of law enforcement. Policemen would often lurk outside coffee houses, ready to arrest anyone who said anything seditious. This created an atmosphere of fear and intimidation, which made it difficult for people to relax and enjoy a cup of coffee. Finally, there was the issue of noise. Coffee houses were some of the loudest establishments in the 18th century, with so many people talking at once about politics, business, and everything in between. It was hard to have a quiet conversation. Patrons often complained about the din, but it was simply impossible to control. After all, what is a coffee house without Samuel Pepys, a man about town, diarist, scandal collector, and survivor of the Great Plague and the Great Fire of London? Samuel Pepys was born in 1633, the son of a wealthy London cloth merchant. His father wanted him to follow in his footsteps, but young Samuel had other plans. He wanted to be a writer. "Okay, fine," says Dad, "so long as you get that writing thing out of your system before you ruin your health," which is what happened to your Uncle Thomas. Poor Thomas, an aspiring playwright, died of tuberculosis at the age of 24. But Samuel managed to avoid the fate of his uncle, and even outlived his father who died in 1660. During his lifetime, Samuel Pepys published a number of successful plays, but it was his diary that made him famous, or rather infamous. Pepys started keeping a diary in 1660 when he was 27. In it, he recorded everything that happened to him every day, including details about his bowel movements. And while his wife, Elizabeth, shared his passion for theater, she wasn't keen on this particular project. She begged him to stop writing about his digestive system, but he didn't listen. So she took matters into her own hands and destroyed a large portion of his diary. What's left is still pretty graphic. For example, on May 1664, he wrote, "A fit of the surfeits came upon me in the night, which made me to my great content give over stools." Lovely stuff. But Pepys wasn't just interested in his bowels. He also wrote about the people he met and the plays he saw, as well as the scandalous gossip he picked up along the way. Some of it was hilarious, like the time he saw a man fall into a privy and break his neck. Other entries were downright creepy, like the time he visited a house of prostitution and watched a woman smoke a pipe while she prostituted herself. Pepys could be a bit much. He was arrested twice for bugging the wrong house. Once he spied on a duke and his mistress only to find out that they were brother and sister. And another time he listened in on a conversation between two men who turned out to be lovers. But Pepys's indiscretions didn't end there. He was also a notorious gossip, and he loved to spread rumors about people he barely knew. He even wrote a book about the scandals of London society, and he planned to publish it after his death. However, a fire broke out in London in 1666, and it destroyed most of his manuscripts, including his diary. Fortunately, his widow made sure that some of the diary survived, and it was published posthumously in 1709. Now, back to the Great Plague. In 1665, Pepys decided to flee London for the countryside. He didn't want to spend the summer in a plague-ridden city, and he had a country house in the village of Braintree. At the time, the plague was so widespread that it was impossible to travel without getting sick, but Pepys was desperate to get out of London. So he took a chance and he hired a horse-drawn coach to take him and his wife to Braintree. They traveled in disguise, and they hid under a woman's skirts for most of the journey. It was a terrifying ordeal, but it worked. They made it to Braintree without getting sick, and they spent the summer there while the plague raged on around them. Pepys returned to London in September 1666, only to find that it had been devastated by a fire. His house was gone, but luckily, his wife and children had managed to escape with their lives. Pepys threw himself into helping the victims of the fire, and he even wrote a pamphlet about how to rebuild London, but he never forgot the horrors of that summer. He wrote about the plague and the fire in his diary, and he used those experiences to inform his writing for the rest of his life. Samuel Pepys died in 1703, having survived the plague, the fire, and a whole lot more. He left behind a legacy of plays, pamphlets, and a diary that would scandalize London society for centuries to come. Have you ever heard about the biggest financial bubble in history? No, it's not the housing bubble of 2008 or the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s. It is a financial bubble that happened way back in the 1720s, but somehow its mystery remains unsolved even today. It is called the South Sea Bubble, and if you hear the term bubble, you should know that we're talking about an economic bubble here, not some sort of soap bubble. This is the story of how the world's first speculative bubble was born and how it burst. It all started with a company called the South Sea Company. As the name suggests, it was a trading company. But instead of just trading in one good or a few related goods like other trading companies, this company traded in something a bit more abstract, the ability to make money. See, this was a charter company, which means that it had a monopoly on trade in a certain area, in this case, the coast of Africa and South America. Now, they weren't really interested in actually trading anything themselves. They didn't want to buy and sell things like other companies. Instead, they wanted to make money by selling the ability to trade there. You see, this was a time when European countries were building up their navies, and so anyone who could get to the coast of Africa and South America first would be able to take control of the lucrative slave trade and gain a ton of wealth. So every nation in Europe wanted to do this. But the problem was, they already had massive navies, and so building bigger navies would cost a fortune. But the South Sea Company had an idea. Why not just give shares in our company to people who want to go to South America and Africa and let them do the work for us? That way we can avoid spending a bunch of money and still profit from the slave trade. And that's exactly what they did. They issued shares in their company, basically little pieces of ownership in the company itself, and sold them to whoever would buy them. Then those people could use those shares to go to South America and Africa and set up shop. Now, in theory, this was a great idea. The South Sea Company made a lot of money from issuing these shares, and then those shareholders could use those shares to make even more money by dominating the slave trade. But in reality, things didn't quite work out like that. You see, the thing about these shares is that they were essentially worthless. I mean, sure, if you bought a share and went to South America, you might be able to make a lot of money, but if you bought a share and gave it to someone else, they wouldn't be able to make any money at all. After all, they'd be using your share. And so unless you had enough influence to lobby the government into giving you exclusive rights to trade in South America, you really weren't going to make any money at all. In fact, because of the way the company was set up, they couldn't even pay dividends to shareholders. So all of these shares were really only worth whatever someone else was willing to pay for them. In other words, they were speculative investments. Their price depended entirely on what people thought they were worth, not on any underlying value. And so while the South Sea Company was making a lot of money off of the initial sale of these shares, none of that money was going towards actually funding voyages to South America. And so no one was actually making money from the slave trade. Even though the shares were worthless, though people kept buying them because they hoped that whoever bought them next would make more money. So the price kept going up and up and up. At its peak, the South Sea Company was trading at over £1,000 per share, even though each share represented only 1/140th of the company. Now, to put that in perspective, if Apple stock were to ever rise to the same proportion, one share of Apple would cost $30,000. But unlike Apple stock, which is backed by one of the most valuable companies in the world, South Sea shares were backed by nothing. But people didn't care because everyone was making money. Well, almost everyone. Those who bought in early and then sold quickly made fortunes. But those who bought in later and later found that their shares were worth less and less until eventually they were totally worthless. So who were the fools who bought in late? And who are the geniuses who bought in early? Well, neither. Because this wasn't a bubble based on some new innovation or some shift in the economy. It was based on nothing. It was purely speculative. The South Sea bubble burst because people stopped believing that the shares had any value at all. And by 1720, when the bubble finally burst, people lost billions of pounds, which in today's money would be over $300 billion. So why does this story matter today? Well, bubbles aren't a new thing. Every bubble is different, of course, but they all follow the same basic pattern. A speculative asset rises in price, then falls, causing huge losses for those who bought in late. And the South Sea bubble was the very first example of this. That is why it is important to understand how bubbles work, so that we can try to avoid them in the future. This is your host. Thanks for watching till the end, and have you ever wondered what it would be like to dine in a place where the food is exquisite, the service is impeccable, the company is refined, and the price tag is astronomical? Well, if you're lucky enough to have a membership, that is, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about dining in a gentleman's club. From the dress code to the menu, from the cost to the crowd, we will cover everything you need to know about what it takes to have a fine dining experience at a gentleman's club. A gentleman's club is an exclusive dining destination for the elite few. It's a place where the food is exquisite, the service is impeccable, and the company is refined. But it's also a place where the rules are many and the prices are steep. If you're not careful, you could end up spending thousands of dollars in one night. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single detail, so let's start with the most important thing, the food. A gentleman's club is not your average restaurant. The menu is usually classic with a twist, meaning that you won't find anything too fancy or instead, you'll find dishes that are made with the finest ingredients and prepared with the utmost care. Think lobster, thermidor, steak tartare, and bidar. The portions are small but perfectly formed, and the presentation is flawless. The wine list is also extensive and expensive. Now let's talk about the dress code. A gentleman's club is a formal affair. You must wear a suit and tie to dine here. And no, a tuxedo is not required. The dress code is there to ensure that everyone who dines at the club is dressed to the nines. And it also helps to create a sense of occasion. After all, you wouldn't show up to a wedding in jeans and a t-shirt, would you? So leave those at home when you go to a gentleman's club. Next, let's discuss the crowd. Who exactly dines at a gentleman's club? Well, it's usually a mix of business moguls, politicians, and celebrities. The club is a place where people go to network and rub shoulders with the elite, so you can expect to see some big names when you dine here. It's also a very male-dominated environment. Most gentlemen's clubs don't allow women to become members, and even if they do, they are often only allowed to bring one guest at a time. Speaking of guests, you must make a reservation well in advance if you want to dine at a gentleman's club. These places are usually booked months ahead of time, so don't expect to waltz in off the street and get a table. You must book your reservation well in advance and have your membership card handy when you arrive. Without it, you won't be seated. The cost is another important factor to consider. A meal at a gentleman's club is not cheap. Expect to spend at least $250 per person before drinks and gratuity. The food is expensive because it's made with the finest ingredients and prepared by the best chefs. The service is also top-notch, which adds to the cost. When you dine at a gentleman's club, you are paying for an experience, not just a meal. So now you know the basics of dining in a gentleman's club. The food is exquisite, the dress code is formal, the crowd is exclusive, reservations are essential, and the cost is steep. But if you can afford it, I highly recommend it. It's an experience that you will never forget. Thank you for watching today's video. We hope you enjoyed learning about what it takes to dine in a gentleman's club. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. We'll see you next time.